Um, Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Good morning. I'm Stephanie Gerber Wilson. Welcome to Freedom Over Fascism Live. We're live streaming now. We're recording for video and audio podcast, and we're on LinkedIn, Substack, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. And today, I would like to welcome Amanda Litman, who is the founder and president of Run for Something, who was last on this podcast almost exactly 2 years ago. And Run for Something recruits and supports young, diverse progressives running for down ballot offices. Since they started in 2017, they've elected more than 1,500 leaders across nearly all 50 states. And today they announced that they have 250,000 candidates in their pipeline. And Amanda's also president of RFS Civics, which is a 501(c)(3) that works to end the gerontocracy. Before coming on here, I watched that you were on another podcast talking about weekly dinners where you invite people over for dinner at your home. And I don't really want to get into that, except for the fact that that is an example of creating relationships and being authentic in a real world, real life, very specific way. And I just want to leave that aside for just a second because it'll come in later when we're talking about the candidates. But so I want to start with this pipeline. We're starting, fascism is upon us, especially at the national level. Your job is to convince people to run for office and then help them along the way. Tell us a little bit about what this pipeline is and why is it important to have candidates that are young and diverse and local in particular?
Because it's the only chance we're going to get for progress over the next couple of years. And it's also the first line of defense against what we're seeing on the national level. Um, as you noted, Run for Something has built a pipeline of 250,000 young people who've raised their hands to say they want to run for office over the last 9 years. It is, as far as we know, the largest candidate pipeline in politics, the largest potential list of leaders basically anywhere. Those are folks, some of whom have already run, some of whom are running, some of whom will run. Many of whom will decide running is not for them, but they want to lead or get involved in other ways. And simply the act of thinking about running has helped push their civic engagement in a meaningful way. We work exclusively on local offices for a couple reasons. One, if you're going to run for office for the first time, it is the most realistic way to start. Quite practically, these offices are small. We're talking about school boards, city councils, maybe state legislature, but also library boards, municipal offices, utility boards. They are mostly a part time. There's very few that are full time. You do not have to quit your job to run for these offices. You do not have to campaign full time. Most of them are unpaid or barely paid, but most of them do not require you to raise millions of dollars. You can run and win raising 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, which is not no money. I don't want to pretend like that's not no money, but that's a reasonable amount of money that you would be surprised how meaningful you could raise it if you really put in the work. These are offices that directly oversee things that affect your quality of life. So when we're talking about affordability, we're talking about housing in particular, which is really what we mean when we talk about affordability. It's local. It's city councils, it's county governments, it's maybe state legislatures. When we're talking about schools, which again is how you determine in many places whether a community is good or bad, is how good or bad the schools are.
Hmm.
That's school boards, that's state legislatures, that's cities, that's municipal offices. Transportation, voting rights, reproductive rights, LGBTQ equality, all of it is happening at the state and local level. And the leaders there have incredible autonomy, as we've seen, both for good and for bad, to push things forward. And in this particular moment, and we're seeing proof of this in Minneapolis as we speak,
Right.
local leaders are on the front lines of defense. If we don't have strong mayors, strong city councils who are willing to fight and use every possible tool they can to push back, we are left out to dry. Because we're not going to get it from Congress. Like, we're just not.
So, yeah, that's a pretty big line that I wanted to talk about is that national leadership is not coming through for us. So local officials plus community members. I just saw an interview with a community organizer in Minneapolis where they have a place where 90 different organizations meet to rise up against ICE. And that muscle started with the George Floyd protests. And I think what you're saying, which is having people at the very local level where partisanship and, MAGA versus not is less of a thing because you're closer to the voters, um, is is really where the progress is going to come. How do you how does that work? Con- national leadership isn't there. Congress, we don't control, but even if we did, we don't control the presidency. How is that dichotomy between what's going on at the national level, which seems to be some sort of vacuum on the pro freedom, pro democracy side, and at the local levels where you're dealing with affordability and trash and all of the things locally, but you're also dealing with ICE coming in to the communities and taking people out. Can you talk about sort of that dichotomy with, how state governments are really important for the state and locals are important for the locals, but there's just no national leadership?
Well, I think there's two ways to think about this. One is the politics, the other is the policy. So let's start with the policy side. We have seen local leaders, not just in Minneapolis, but in Portland, in Chicago, in North Carolina, in California, and elsewhere, use every possible lever they can to hold us accountable. In Portland, one of our city council members, I believe the city council president, was pushing forward ordinances to end ICE's lease on a property within city limits and to fine them pretty substantially. We've seen our alum in various states push forward legislation to require ICE to unmask themselves, to wear identification in some way, to stop being the secret police. We have seen them pass rules or ordinances around entering churches, synagogues, places of worship, and schools, and really use every possible lever they can to push back. Now, can they do everything? No. But something is better than nothing in this particular moment. And showing that there is fight, and more importantly, even institutional fight, is really, really important. On the political side, we're not going to get a Democratic Party that is willing to fight on the national level until we elevate more of these leaders on the local level. One of my mantras really over the last decade has been the way you win the big elections is to win lots and lots of little ones. It builds our muscle for victory. We've seen this in 2025. We won a lot in 2025. I think allows us to go into this year feeling like we are better prepared as a party to fight like hell. We also, as we win, control more levers of power that can shape redistricting maps or voter suppression laws or the ability to push back in any way over federal overreach into elections. I think that's really important. And the talent that we have rising through the ranks of the Democratic Party that is growing to become the national scene, so many of them have come from local government. Mallory McMorrow in Michigan, state senator. Zach Walz in Iowa, state senator. Ruah Roman in Georgia, state legislator. Francesca Hong in Wisconsin, who's running for governor, state legislator. Alexis Hill, running for governor in Nevada, is a county commissioner in Washoe County. We are seeing this state after state after state. Some of your best leaders rising to the top of the state level or the national level have come from state or local government. Yes, we need outsiders, we need fresh voices, we need people who are not like beholden to any particular institution, but knowing how government works is a good thing. Having experience as a leader and as an elected leader is a good thing. These are tried, true, tested candidates.
Right. And when you're at the local level, people know you for
People
you.
know them.
Right.
They've done stuff. And I think having done stuff is a underrated quality as a candidate.
Exactly. Knowing that, not everything is just a big idea. It's actually, people on the ground taking actions that change people's lives. So, as you know, we've talked a lot on here about making sure that we're running at every level, that we have a candidate. We're not letting seats go uncontested.
Mhm.
And I think your organization is a big part of that. Can you just tell people who are maybe thinking about running for office what your organization does and what they should think about, how they should think about, you how they should think about running for office and being in office, and how do they find support in every different way?
Great questions. So the first thing you should do if you're thinking about running for office is go to runforwhat.net. You can look up what office you might be able to run for in your community in 2026. And in most places, not all, but in most places, it's not too late to get on the ballot. Although the deadlines are starting to hit week after week. So take a look. It's never too late, rarely too late to get started, and it's never too early. You should be able to answer two out of the next three questions, and I'll explain in a moment. One, what is the problem you care about solving? Like, what is the thing that is going to be your answer for why you're running? Is it housing? Is it childcare? Is it reproductive rights? Is it fighting fascism? Like, whatever it might be. It could be any number of things. There's no right answer. There's only the right answer for you. Why are you thinking about running? What is the problem you care about solving? The second is, what is the office that you're running for? How does that place give you power to solve it? Which, if you don't know the exact answer, that's the one where we can help you figure it out. But if you're really thinking about housing, you might think about city council based on zoning or municipality rules. If you're thinking about education, you might talk about school board. If you're thinking about voting rights, like you could be running for election administrator or state legislature. A lot of different ways you could think about it. But every office has slightly different power. What are you going to do given the office that you want to hold with that power? And the third question is actually the most important one, which is, why should voters want you to win? You want to win because winning is great and losing sucks. Voters want you to win because you're going to do something for them that they're going to feel. Like, what's in it for them? How is their life going to be different if you win? Those are the questions. Everything else about campaigns are logistics. And Run for Something can help you figure out the logistics. We can help you figure out how to get on the ballot, how to build a team, how to prepare your campaign message, how to get lit printed, all of the like nuts and bolts of starting a campaign and running it and winning it. We can help you. We cannot answer the question of why. You have to know it.
And
Only
in a
other
larger
requirement,
sense,
I
oh,
would
go
just
ahead.
say, is you gotta be willing to work hard.
Yeah.
Lazy candidates don't win elections.
Unless they're a Republican and funded by
Mhm.
the machine and they don't have to do anything. So I think what you just said is so important on every different level is, why should voters vote for you? What do you stand for? Not what are you against, but what are you for? And I think that in some ways that's a muscle we're relearning because we've been fighting against this regime for so long. We have to, at the local level, it's easier, but we have to remind ourselves that we are actually for something. And Mamdani did it amazingly well in New York, but I think he did it in such an authentic way that from what I saw, it really didn't feel forced. And I also see that because he ran on affordability, some people boil all races down to voters want to talk about affordability. That's it.
Hmm.
And that may not be the thing that is the most important in any particular place. Maybe a place like Minneapolis, people want their neighbors to stop being kidnapped and want there not to be federal officers that are iffy on federal officers because they're not identified shooting people in the street. So I think it's really important to stay true to what's really true in your area
Mhm. Well,
and who you are.
I think this is one of the challenges of running for Congress in this moment. It's one of my sort of calls for the year is to give the megaphone to candidates who can talk about what they're going to be able to credibly deliver. That's not to say that people running for Congress aren't important. Like, obviously, we need to win the House and win the Senate. It's incredibly necessary for holding Trump accountable, for oversight into the Republican government, judges, lots and lots of reasons why we need to flip Congress. And that doesn't mean that our candidates for Congress are going to be our most compelling messengers in 2026. You think about one of the strengths that Mamdani had that, even Mikey Sherrill, Abigail Spanberger, and others had, is they were running for offices that could actually credibly do stuff. If you're running for Congress, the most you are going to be able to plausibly deliver over the next 2 years or 3 years is oversight and accountability. And you honestly don't have a ton of credibility on that, given the way the Democratic Party has behaved over the last year.
Although
Give
you
them
might
that.
have credibility in saying, for the most part, the folks that are already in there look like they're, you know,
Hmm.
out to lunch underwater, not seeing the world, and to show that you want to be a leader and not just, you know, follow the grassroots. Because I think
That's totally true. I think that is absolutely plausible. And I think if you want to talk about things that really affect people's quality of life, talk to me about housing, talk to me about childcare. Yes, talk to me about how you're going to stop ICE from kidnapping people off the streets. But the way that looks in Minneapolis is very different than how it looks in most other parts of the country right now, or, in many parts of the country, at least, I won't say most. Being really mindful that, especially in this election, people want to hear how you're going to change things up. And Congress cannot credibly promise a ton of change. They're just not going to be able to legislate. Again, I want to reiterate this. It doesn't mean it's not important. It doesn't mean we don't need to win it. But the people who can credibly argue they're going to be able to do stuff should have our loudest possible megaphones in this election cycle. You should be showing up to vote because you are excited about your governor or your mayor or your city council, and then, oh yeah, also voting for Congress. That is what we should hope for this year, because if we are pinning all of our hopes on people being excited to vote for someone for the U.S. House of Representatives, I'm not holding my breath.
neither. And, I've had a couple of people on recently, and this is a slight diversion. But last week I talked to Anat Shenker Osorio and Doug Friednash, who is a local public sector lawyer in Denver. And it was very interestingly, they had very different answers on this question, which is, can we vote ourselves out of our situation? And Anat, maybe surprisingly, this was the day after Renee Good was shot, was saying, we're not going to vote ourselves out of this. We need to organize and work with the local representatives, but we're not for Congress. Like, what we're going to do in the midterms is not going to, overthrow this government. Um, Doug Friednash, on the other hand, who is not out there in the grassroots, who's like, we got to win in 26. That's the only way we're going to save this. And I asked, do you think that that vote can get us out of this? And he said yes. So my sense is that there's something in between, and that's where you are. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on those two different approaches.
I think it is yes and no. I think you are right. It's somewhere in between. Will voting alone end this crisis? No. If we don't win big in 2026, we won't even have the chance. It is necessary, but it alone is not sufficient. And I think that flipping Congress, winning locally, expanding our institutional power with leaders willing to fight is necessary. It also is not going to be enough without also deep pushback on the grassroots, institutions, businesses, civic institutions, philanthropy, and everyone else finding a backbone and being willing to push back. Just winning in November of 2026 gives us the opportunity. And if we don't have that opportunity, I think we will be in somehow much more dire straits.
I think that makes sense. And frankly, Anat said, she said that I'm not telling you not to vote. Voting is necessary, but not sufficient. So that was a little bit of a detour because I would like to go back to the idea when we're talking about any officials at any level, really. We have a gerontocracy specifically at the national level. We have people in power that are really, really old and haven't given up power. And I know that you're involved in trying to move things along. And I read your book and you talked about boomers and almost boomers and then millennials and Gen Z. And I'm wondering, number one, I'm Gen X.
Hmm.
And it's a trope, and it's it's this thing that we're the forgotten generation, right? Where do you see and boomers are our parents, Gen Z is our kids, and we're the sandwich generation in so many different ways. Where do you see the opportunity for Gen X to perhaps mentor people in terms of leadership skills? Because there's also a lot of that you talk about, and I do too. I'm also a leadership coach. But assuming that you didn't mean to exclude the entire generation, where do you see the in-betweens as where's their value?
Such a good question. It's been one of my favorite pieces of feedback about the book, which is you forgot Gen X, which I'm like, no, very class, as you know, very quintessential Gen X to feel forgotten, though. I think the real problem is that Gen X has gotten screwed by the boomers just as much as anyone else. And we're seeing this in real time data in about Fortune 500 companies right now, where as they are starting to do succession planning, they're going from boomer CEO to millennial CEO.
Yes.
They're skipping Gen X. They're either too senior or not, like, not young enough.
Not young enough. We're in our 50s.
Yeah, in 50s. And I am so sorry. That sucks. Blame the boomers, but that sucks. Now, I do not. That is not to say that I don't think that Gen X has incredible value, especially in terms of mentorship and supporting younger leaders. But y'all got straight up screwed. I am so sorry. I suspect, rather, I believe that one of the best things that Gen X can do to really help is use the power that y'all do have, whether it's in institutions or in businesses or as leaders, to create space for the next generation. Because the way that boomers have modeled this, broadly speaking, not all boomers, but broadly speaking, of staying in until it is too late is not a way that we can move forward. It is not sustainable. It is not institution building. It is also like not good for anyone's mental or physical health. Who wants to die behind their desk? Not me. I think
Yeah.
that reframe of like, what can I do to help make this stronger than just one person or one individual's efforts? And how can I help bolster the next generation and function as a mentor, as a even more than that, as a sponsor is so important.
I'm really glad to hear you say that because for a number of different reasons. So, a lot of people here will know that I have a business where we teach groups of people. At this point, it's librarians and colleges, human centered leadership, humaning, bringing the definition of leadership being making everyone around you better as opposed to a series any sort of actual personality traits that you have is like what kind of environment do you make for the people on your team. And I think that if you combine the need for right, Gen X got screwed in a lot of different ways, which is an entirely different probably series of things. But if we can change the concept of leadership from the boomer top down, I'm a leader, thus you must do this. And I know you've talked about this a lot and
Mhm.
recently said on LinkedIn, let people step away and like catch their breath. This is like the world is falling apart. What do you think about like finding a way to change that whole concept of humaning and bringing yourself as a human to the workplace,
Mm,
at least the part where you're relating to other people as humans and not just as, this is my boss, I'm their supervisor, just coming together for more collaboration and work together.
well, this is one of the challenges of leading in this moment. It's one of the challenges of leading really over the last 5 years is that you are better served by bringing more of yourself, your humanity, your authenticity into your role as a leader, into your workplace, your community, wherever your leadership sphere of influence may be. And to do so in a way that doesn't overextend you or give you like a vulnerability hangover or cross boundaries that you maybe didn't mean to cross is really hard. And you have to do it in a way that doesn't serve your ego, but serves your mission, your goal, your bottom line. Like it has to be in service of the team or the business, whatever it might be, not yourself. If that sounds like an impossible type line, like a high line wire, high wire line act, whatever the expression is, to navigate,
It
it
is.
feels like it is. And it's a challenge that leaders 10 years ago, 20 years ago didn't have to navigate in the same way, in part because they had clearer boundaries between work and not work. You couldn't bring your work home with you. Your employees weren't following you on Instagram. You didn't have to like create a personal brand by posting on LinkedIn. Like all of that is now the responsibility of leadership as much as making decisions and setting budgets and, you know, organizing a lunch or whatever it might be, running an office. That is a lot for one person to take on. It's why I wrote When We're in Charge, because it was a thing I have been experiencing as a personal challenge over the last 9 years and that I'd heard from our candidates, from our elected officials, and from my peers like, this feels impossible. What I recommend for folks is in this particular moment to really have a sense of who you are, what your team and your organization needs of you. What is the overlap between the two? And what are the boundaries you can draw around? I am never saying fake it. I am saying be responsibly authentic. Know exactly how much of yourself you want to give away. And know that when you do that, you model what you want your team to behave like. And that I think is like the crux of leadership is you are as the leader, you are not the thermostat or you're not the thermometer reading the temperature in the room. You are the thermostat. You set the temperature, the
Mhm.
tone that you set, the mood, the vibe, the aura, whatever. That is how your people will show up as well. You can see this in practice, in businesses, in campaigns, in all kinds of leadership spaces. When the leader is comfortable and confident and knows who they are and what they believe and how much they need to present themselves, like it makes it better. Makes it better.
And they also need to learn, how do you lead with your humanity and not with, your office and your power, because that all creates different kinds of opportunities for the people around you, makes them better, makes the whole system better, as opposed to just solving technical problems. So, for the chat and people who are listening later, shameless plug, contact me for if you have teams that want help learning how to human better in the workplace. We have this conversation about showing up as human, but having a boundary in a work setting. How does that transfer to an elected official setting?
So I actually think Zoran Mamdani is a really good example of this for many reasons. He is absolutely authentic. You can see it. He knows what he believes, he knows what his core values are, and he can reframe or adjust to meet the needs of the moment. It doesn't mean pivot, that doesn't mean like integrate away or move away from his core values, but rather understand how much of that he needs to repackage in order to best meet the moment and better serve his goals, which in this point is to govern the city of New York. He is deeply human, but also like we don't really know that much about his personal life. Even though he's married, his wife seems cool. But there's a very clear boundary that has been set there. And I really appreciate that. And I think that is like an example of how a politician can show up in this moment as human, a boundary. I think AOC also does this very well.
Yeah, we don't know much about, I mean, I don't know anything about her partner,
No, he
and I
seems like
don't
a
need
nice
to.
kid. Yeah, doesn't matter. I'm sure he's lovely. Similarly, there's a number of elected officials and candidates for whom they have clearly decided what parts of their private life or personal life or like, non-political part are part of their persona or their shtick or what have you, and the rest is not. And I think that's good. That is a good thing, especially knowing that right now we need people, rather voters, trust people, not institutions. They're looking for individuals they can build a relationship with. And as icky as it may feel, we need people to have quasi parasocial relationships with their candidates. That does not mean do not hold them accountable. That does not mean do not like yell at them, but to feel a sense of affinity towards them that makes you want to show up and vote and then do things
And
afterwards.
make it and volunteer. I think in the 2020 election, I was a Pete Buttigieg supporter, and he was, I don't know that people who didn't support him felt this way, but with his supporters, he was a genius at creating that parasocial relationship between him and the super volunteers. So it made it people wanted to become super volunteers. The staff, had social media, so we felt like we knew the staff, and I think that kind of changing, and I'm reserving judgment on him right now, and we're not going to talk about that because I don't even know. All I want is for somebody at the national level to so the answer I'm getting when I say where's the national leadership going to come from is, well, we're the grassroots. They will follow us, but they're not going to lead us.
The
What I
leaders,
Yeah.
I would say, like the leaders of today are not going to be the leaders of tomorrow. They're just not.
Mm-mm.
They're not well suited for it. They don't have the skills. They don't have the stomach. They're not They're not gonna be the one. Like, they got us into this crisis, whether implicitly or explicitly, they cannot get us out of it. The leaders that are coming up, the ones that are taking to the streets across the country to run mutual aid and follow ICE around and all kinds of things. The ones running for local office, those are the leaders we need. They're coming. They're coming. They're here, actually. Those are the ones we should be looking to.
So how do we look to them right now? Let's assume you're talking as a professional in politics. I'm talking as a, I guess, para quasi professional and activist, and people in the chat are activists. How do we take the longing and the need for direction from people who ought to be knowing what they're doing and able to rally and galvanize people to slim that down and say, okay, we're not getting that there. We need to get it locally. We need to get it regionally. Maybe some of the governors, some of the state legislators. How do we make that shift so that we're looking at the people coming up or the people at the state level and not continuing to look to the national level for something we're never going to find?
I think it's starting to look at home. Look around you wherever you live. There is someone running for city council or serving on city council that is doing good stuff or is ready to do good stuff if they're supported. I often find the closer, further down the ballot, the closer to your door, you can really get to know them. If you have a city council member, you can probably email them and get coffee with them in the next couple weeks. You can
Even
build
a
a
state legislator.
state legislator, mayor, you'd be shocked at how accessible most of these folks are in a way that it would take months or years, if ever, you could get a meeting with your member of Congress. That's not the way it should be, but that's the way it is. Take advantage of that. Look locally, in part because it's where you can get really good progress, but it's also where you can get wins that will give you the hope and the muscle you need to keep fighting. The thing I have found, the way I have stayed sustained in this work over the last 9 years, is that every couple weeks we've got an election. Every couple weeks, run for something candidates are on the ballot, and sometimes every week from June through September. And every couple weeks we have a winner. And winning is really fun, actually. Sometimes we have 2 or 10, or in the case of 2025, hundreds. And that allows forward momentum.
That's awesome. Winning is fun. The way I think about it also though is hope isn't equality, just like leadership isn't equality. It's a series of actions that allow you to know that you're doing something so that it's not like you're just sitting there watching it go by and getting so depressed you can barely get out of bed because frankly, we're in that kind of situation now. Do you have any thoughts for activists? And we're getting close to the top of the hour, so we'll wind this up soon. As we think about activists and we think about relationships with each other and how important those are, a- authenticity and mentorship and all of the things, what are your words of wisdom to the people who might be on this live right now or might listen or watch later who are really involved enough to be watching listening to a show like this?
Go as local as you can. Get to know your neighbors as deeply as you can. I mean neighbors in both the literal and figurative sense. And commit to be in it for the long haul, which I know if you are watching this, you can be. And know that there is, with few exceptions, almost no wrong way to engage in this moment. Whatever you can do in the way that feels right for you is the thing you can do, and it is something that someone must do. I've loved seeing in the points of inspiration out of Minneapolis. I just came across my feed yesterday. Laundromats are somewhere where ICE has been stalking out based on who goes to use laundromats. So there is a mutual aid network that is set up to do people's laundry. If you're really good at doing laundry, couldn't be me, but if that brings you joy as a way you can contribute, that is incredibly meaningful.
It is.
No one thing, no singular hero, no singular act of resistance, no march, no protest. And as we talked about before, no one election is going to end this crisis. It is going to take all of it for a while. And whatever way you can contribute, whatever action you take, something is better than nothing. And something is better than a lot of people are doing.
Yeah. Tim Snyder came out today and said, you're not responsible for the whole thing, but do something, which only proves that he's always right. Yeah, which is oh, did you see people, if you haven't seen it yet, people in Minneapolis have created these kinda, they're not like floats, they're these big representations of ice or a drink or whatever, and they're shoving them down a hill on skis and having, like, I don't even know how to describe this, but it is part of the refuse, resist, ridicule recipe. Is they're having fun with it and they're being creative with it, and I think that that's important too. We talked in live I was on yesterday about joy and continuing to live our lives as much as possible in whatever situation we're in, that joy can be an act of resistance too, but still doing something would be helpful.
That's
Um,
exactly.
is there anything that you want to say that I haven't asked you? I know we went all over the place, but
I don't think so. I feel like we covered so much and that, if you're the kind of person that's watching this, you're the kind of person we need to run for office or to work for someone running for office. So whether you're the candidate or you're a volunteer or a staffer, it all helps. So thank you for what you're doing.
so before we say goodbye, I would like to ask all of you to subscribe to Amanda on Substack. Um, Follow Run for Something. Follow me at freedomoverfascism.us. And if you can become a paid subscriber, that would be great, or buy me a coffee. And stay involved. And let's keep talking about humaning, because that's a big, long piece that's missing. The other thing that I have talked about recently, and I think we need to learn to be like the Chinese or the Republicans and think in decades, which is what you guys are doing, rather than election cycles. Like, you're thinking of election cycles, but you're looking at people who will influence things 20 years from now also. And I want to try. I'm like, I want to be a enthusiast for thinking beyond next year and the 2028.
I love that.
Nick, who's in Nick Parrow, who's in this chat with me, we came up with the um, 2075 tricentennial action group. Tag you're it for democracy. We've done nothing with it, but like, I feel like we need to be thinking in those sorts of big chunks, because I don't think we are.
That would expand the time horizon for success.
Yeah, right. And it's not like time stops. Like, we all, I think, well, time, okay, I'm getting way off here. Time since the pandemic, I think, is a total
Mhm.
time fuckery. Like, it's Nick is saying he would love to meet you. So he's all over Substack, and I will introduce you. So I want to thank you so much for being here, and everyone who's here with us live, everyone who's going to be here with us later. Keep humaning and think about running for office.
Thanks.
Thank you.